Thoughts today, Dr. Robert Nelson. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to begin with, you sure, Josh, you wouldn't be tempted to begin with the thought that spaces become winsome insofar as they carry a metaphor. So they become evocative and, I guess, suggestive, because something in the space we read. And I think we've got a strong cue with this idea of a precinct, in that it already has an image in it in language. So the image there is the belt. Cingulum is the belt that goes around you, and so it's a little bit like, should we say, foregirded. This zone is foregirded. And it's a very curious metaphor that occurs elsewhere, like when we say zone, like when we zone something, that is a belt. So it's the Greek word for belt, zone, and it's obviously, an image that sort of wraps around your middle, and it both contains, and in one case, I suppose, keeps out. So with the case of chastity belt, that it actually keeps out. So this concept of the belt, which is warm and embracing, is also very exclusive. And with that sort of, and I suppose even the sense that it contains, might be wanting, with the girdle, which is the same word, they might be wanting to contain unwanted spread. So right down to that, the image of the body is quite suggestive. But and when we talk of zones, of course, they are automatically contested, because we say, look, we've zoned something as commercial. That means you can't have residential. That means that you don't get the sort of cohabitation. You don't get the benefits of all that fantastic interchange, and we don't populate the street in the same way. So there's a downside. And I guess that we can always say of precincts that they're jealous spaces, that their devotees are anxious about what sort of things are happening. And although we're very inclusive, we're in an inclusive mood, but if we owned the Acropolis, we would have some shame admitting an Apple store on the Sacred Mount. No? So we're not that inclusive ever. We will disallow. And it's quite a severe concept. The Greek idea of the precinct was actually, the image there is to cut. So tέμενος, the tέμενος is this zone that they say we will cut, thereby eliminating, as it were, contamination from outside. So it's a strong verb, and it also, like temenizo, is to consecrate. So to cut, temenizo, to consecrate. It's a very beautiful transition. So, and we have this also, amazingly, the image occurring in the garden. The garden is also from the gürtel, the girdle, the belt, and we similarly impute to that a certain sort of sacred something. So, the sacred grove, the alsos in ancient Greece, is important as the lofty mount. And all gardens kind of have that, like Milton's, the verdurous wall of paradise shoots forth. So they're all kind of sacralized. And another spooky thing is that right into the early modern period, the idea of the precinct still applied to the body. So I have a number of poets in my kitty, which I won't go through, that actually refer to a person being precincted. And it's always illustrious. It's always like garlands or roses or something like that. So the person is sort of carrying around this sort of aura, this portable aura, which is this belt of, garland or whatever. So, and incidentally, I've noticed in English poetry that the word is scanned so that the emphasis in the 17th century was precinct. We never said precinct, it was always precinct. So something can be precincted. Very beautiful. So I take this to architecture and I say, I can sort of see something spooky happening here. That the paradox in architecture is that what you experience is something about public space that's personal to you. And that sort of inalienable privacy that's somehow preserved in public space, that's what a precinct can do. And I know that precincts serve ownership. And an example of this is in language. Again, I think Tamburlaine in Christopher Marlowe's play says, "You would find it easier to extract the crown from the Sultan than to get a prize from my precinct." He's very jealous. My precinct. So here's the weird part, that in a cultural precinct, you are that proprietor, you as an individual. In one of, it's not always sacred. We know this from early days when Dante refers to one of the Bolgia of hell as a precinct. But when he gets to heaven, he comes to a circle, he says, of love and light. And in this precinct, he says, the feeling is experienced, though shared by everyone there, by that person alone. Now, isn't that chilling? That person alone, though sharing what everyone else gets, the same love and light, but it's something peculiar to that person who's experiencing it. That is, in my view, a precinct. It's slightly oxymoronic, that what it does for everyone. Who hasn't sort of, like if you've got the air ticket and you've gone to Paris and you're in that courtyard of the Louvre, who doesn't sort of take on this sort of spirit of French nobility, even though we're who we are. And the same fantasies, overcome anyone visiting Harajuku or something. You imagine yourself as incredibly hip. Precincts encourage delusion. But your presence has to be special in a precinct, and it is, and I think language is telling in that sense that it is about you and your presence, your immediate presence, that belt that is that zone that's your personal space. And one institution in architecture that infallibly does this for us is the landmark. So the landmark claims space for a space, but you bizarrely identify with the landmark, because landmark in its sort of layered gravity or whatever, that articulated form mimics, foot, body, head, whatever, and you sort of feel a kind of rightness in your presence in that landmark. The precinct is not quite like that. The precinct is not phallic. The precinct it can contain any number of landmarks, but it is that space in between. And it is especially the concourse that makes sense of them, that groups them, as it were, in that conceptual belt. And I think, by the way, that zone is female word in Greek. And in fact, for the Greeks, there was a male counterpart, zostir. Zostir is the male belt. And as you can imagine, this is the one with the provision for the sword, holds up the appendage. It's not like, this is the female concept, this belt, this embrace. And so this is something that I kind of like to conclude with, that I feel that language is proffering us a cue here, and it is something wonderful about this belt, this embrace. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm acutely conscious there was an expression in Greek about loosening the belt which was quite lewd. But ladies and gentlemen, I invite you now to loosen your belt on something which is very innocent. Thank you so much. Thank you.